We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis in Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 27b. The Gemara infers from the Brisa, Bizman Shahabal Mod, in a situation where you find the get and the husband admits, Mihos Yachzer L'isha, so you do return the get to the wife, Afilu Lizman Meruba, even if it's been a long delay, even if it's been a long time. And that's the contradiction that Rabbi Zera has between our Mishnah and this Brisa. This Brisa seems to imply you return the get even after a long time, and our Mishnah says you do not, because there's a concern it's not the get of the right individual. Umeshani, and so then Rabbi Zera answered, Kan b'makom shashayaros mitzuyos. Again, in one place we're talking about a situation where there are frequent caravans. There's more of a concern that this get doesn't really belong to this person. It belongs to someone else with the same name. And Kan b'makom shein hashayaros mitzuyos. In the other situation, by the Brisa, we're talking about where there are not frequent caravans. There's less of a concern, and that's why the Brisa is lenient. And the Gemara continues, Ika diamri, there are those that say, V'hu shehuchzaku hu delo lahadr, that Rabbi Zera was saying that only in a situation where there are shayaros mitzuyos and it's huchzaku, and you have a chazaka, that there's two individuals with the same name from that city, that's when you're strict. You have to have both conditions to be strict, otherwise you're lenient. V'hainu d'Rabba, and according to that version, Rabbi Zera would agree with Rabba on the previous Amud. V'ika diamri, there are those that say, Afagav delo huchzaku, even in a situation where there's no such chazaka, but as long as you have shayaros mitzuyos, as long as there are caravans that are frequent, lo lahadr, still you don't return it, and you're strict. Upliga d'Rabba, according to that version, Rabbi Zera would argue with Rabba. Rabbi Zera would be stricter than Rabba in that regard. And the Gemara continues, Bishlama d'Rabba lo amar Rabbi Zera. I understand why Rabba did not ask the question like Rabbi Zera. Rabba in the previous summit, he asked the question on our Mishnah from another Mishnah. So that makes sense. Masnisin alim v'leilak. It's better for Rabba to ask questions from a Mishnah against a Mishnah rather than asking a question like Rabbi Zera did from a Brisa against our Mishnah. El Rabbi Zera, but Rabbi Zera, my time alone, Rabba, why doesn't he say like Rabba? Why is he choosing to ask a question from a Brisa when he could have asked the same type of contradiction from a Mishnah? And the Gemara answers, Amar Loch, Rabbi Zera will say to you, Mika Tani, does it say in that Mishnah, Im Amar Tenu Nosten Vafil Uzman Meruba, that if the person says give it, then we give it even if there's a long delay, even if there's a long time? Dilma, maybe what we say is as follows. Im Amar Tenu Nosten, we understand that if he says Tenu, then we give it, but Kedekaimal on the altar, but it's only if it's immediate. But if it's not found immediately, then you would not return it, so there isn't a clear contradiction from the Mishnah. And Rashi says, Mikatani b'Bava Metzia, does it say in the Mishnah Bava Metzia, Ha'amar Tenu Nosten V'afilu Zman Meruba, that if the person says give it, then we give it, even if there's been a long delay? Dilmo im Amar Tenu Nosten Uliolam Kedekaimal, and maybe if he says Tenu, we give it, but that's only if it's immediate. And Rashi explains Kilomar, what it means to say is as follows. Vaday al karchen ha'amar tenu nosen daikinan mina. Certainly we can infer from the Mishnah in Bava Metzia that if the person says tenu, then we give it. Midatala taiva benim lachalein, because it says in the Mishnah the reason we don't give it is because maybe the person changed his mind. So clearly if he didn't change his mind, if he says tenu, then we understand to make that inference. El lizman meruba, but the fact that you're also inferring that we even give it after a long delay, mehechad yakt, how can you infer that? Maybe it's just like we said over here in Gittin. Matzah la'alter kosher, matzah la'alter kosher, that it's only if it's immediate it's kosher. Maybe that's true in Bava Metzia as well. Aval Brisa, but when it comes to the Brisa, so vadai kasha, that certainly poses this difficulty. To katani achzer l'isha, there it's not an inference to return it. There it actually says explicitly in the Brisa that if you're not concerned that the person changed his mind, you certainly would return it to the wife. V'ila alter v'habal moda. Now, if the case over there in the Brisa is it's immediate, and the husband again is admitting, and that's why we're returning it, pshita, that would be too obvious. Lamai nichoshla. What would be the concern? Ilav dashminan, unless the Brisa is teaching us afil izman meruba, that even if there's a long delay, you still return it to the wife. Lo itzrich lemisni. Otherwise, there's no point in learning that Brisa. To bishlam masnisin lotana babehedya ha'amar tenu nos. And I understand in the Mishnah it doesn't say explicitly that if the person says give it, then we give it. V'itzrich lemisni mishum higufa lashminan delo yachzer. And so then there's a chiddush not to return it. Shani omer, because I say maybe the person changed his mind. That makes sense in the Mishnah. But again, in the Brisa, it has to be saying that even lizman meruba would be returned. And the Gemara continues with another answer to the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Bava Metzia and the Brisa we brought in the previous summit. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Kegon Teko Amri Edim, in the case where we're going to return it even after a long delay, that's specifically in a situation where the Edim say, Me'olam lo chasamnu elo al get echad shel Yosef ben Shimon, that we only signed one get with the name Yosef ben Shimon, and therefore based on the testimony of the Edim, we can be sure that this get is being returned to the proper individual. But the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, why Why do we even need to say that? It seems so obvious. But the Gemara says, not necessarily. What might you have said? Maybe we should be concerned that not only are the names on this get the same, but also the names of the Eidim happen to be identical. Kamash Malon, that's the Chiddush over here, that in a situation where the Eidim themselves are testifying, we don't need to be concerned that there were other Eidim with the same name. And the Gemara continues with another answer to the contradiction. Rav Ashi says, Kagon to Ka'amar, for example, we return in a case where the person says, Nekev yesh bo b'tzados plonis, that there's a hole at the side of this particular letter, to have a siman muvak. That's already a siman that's called a siman muvak. That is a clear-cut siman. It is obvious that this is the same document. V'davka b'tzados plonis, to have a siman muvak. And that's only true if the person has a siman where he says, again, the hole is at the side of this particular letter, which is a siman muvak, which is a clear-cut siman. But if the person just testifies about a hole in general, that would not be good enough. And the Gemara explains, Misafka lei, Rav Ashi is in doubt, Simonin ido raisa ido rabbanon, whether Simonim are do raisa or do rabbanon, therefore he doesn't want to rely on a regular simon, he only relies on a simon muvak. And the Gemara continues, Rabba bar Barchana irchis le gita be midrash, Rabba bar Barchana lost again in the base medrash. Amar, and he said, Isimana isli begavia, itvias eina isli begavia. If you want a simon, I have a simon, and if you want tvias eina, meaning the fact that I can simply testify that I recognize it, that also I have. Adru and Hile. So then they returned it to him. Amar, and then he said, Lo yadana, I don't know. Imishum simona ahadrua v'kasavri simonim doraisa. Did they return it to me because of the simon I provided, and they hold that simonim are doraisa? Imishum tviyasein, or maybe they returned it to me because I recognized it. V'daf katzor midrabanan, and in terms of recognition, that's only true by a Talmud Chacham. If a Talmud Chacham says he recognizes it, then we rely on that. Avalinish bial malo, but a regular person, we would not rely on tviyasayin. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said v'im lav pasal, and if he doesn't find it immediately, so then it's puzzle. We're concerned it's not the same document. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ezu Shalola Alter, what's considered not immediately, what's considered a delay. Rabbi Nosson Omer Shashah Kedei Shetavor Shayara V'Tish. Rabbi Nosson says it's the amount of time that a caravan can pass through and camp over there. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Shimon ben Elazar says, Kedei Shei Adam Omed V'Roeh Shelo Avar Sham Adam. It's not a set amount of time, but it's as long as the person is standing there and he sees that no one else passed through, so then that's considered immediate. V'yesh Omer, others say Shelo Shah Adam Sham, as long as the person saw that nobody stopped there, so then that's still considered to be immediate. Again, it's not a specific amount of time. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, Kedei lichtov es haget, it's the amount of time that it takes to write a get. If it's longer than that, that's considered a delay. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Kedei likroso, Rabbi Yitzchak says it's the amount of time to read a get. Acherim Omer, others say, Kedei likosvo vilikroso, it's the amount of time to write it and to read it. And the Gemara says, V'afilu shah v'yesh bo simonin mi'idim olav, and even if there was a delay, but the person has a simon, the person has a sign that he knows this is the same document, the amri nekev yesh bo b'tzados plonis, that he says that there's a hole at the side of this particular letter, so that in that case also, we do not need to be concerned that it's a different document. But the person is not allowed to testify regarding simonim of the document itself, meaning saying that it was a long document or a short document. That is not considered to be a sufficient simon. And the Gemara continues, Matzu kasher b'kis ba'arniki u'v'tabas. Let's say he finds the get, and it's inside a pouch or a purse, or it's encircled by a ring. And Rashi explains, Mitzo kasher b'kiso ba'arniki u'makaras hakis v'yas ha'arniki. Again, he finds it in this pouch or the person. He recognizes the pouch or the purse, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph.